How you doing, guys? This is the second of the year 8 revision videos on your PE theory, and I just wanted to go over some of the things that we were started to look at last week to do with muscles and movement and how muscles contract, work and relax to actually make those movements happen in sporting examples. So the first thing we're actually going to look at is the type of contraction where there is no movement, and this is called isometric muscle contraction. So in this type of contraction, the muscles are working, but there's no change in length in the muscle. And the reason for that is that there's no movement taking place, so there's no need for the muscles to actually either increase or decrease in length, and that's called isometric contractions. Okay, it's not any easier than an isotonic contraction. In fact, some people find it a little bit more difficult. So when you think of positions like a plank or holding a squat, maybe against like a wall sit, those are really difficult exercises. Your muscles are working really hard, but they're not changing in length. Okay, so for example, if I was to hold a plank position for about 20 seconds, I get into my plank like this. Now my muscles are working to keep me stable. Okay, and you will feel it after a little while, and your arms start to shake and your core starts to shake, and that's because they're working quite hard to hold that position. It's the same thing if you did something like a wall sit. So you will feel it in your legs because your muscles are working really hard, but because you're not moving, there's no change in length. For example, I'm sitting like that, and you'll know that after a while that position starts to become a bit uncomfortable because you're having to work so hard, but there's no change in length of the muscles. Third example, for instance, if you were doing some weight training and you held the weights in a set position, so whether it was holding them like that, your muscles start to shake a little bit because they're working so hard. If you held them out to the side, before any movement takes place, when there's no movement, that is called an isometric muscle contraction. Now obviously there's not too many instances like that in sport. Most of the time you are moving, but those are some examples. Now the opposite of that is isotonic muscle contraction. Isotonic muscle contraction is where there is a change in length in the muscle. Okay, and because of that change in length in the muscle, movement takes place. Now you can have two types of isotonic muscle contraction. The most common type is concentric. Concentric muscle contraction is where the muscle shortens during the contraction. Okay, the opposite is eccentric, where it gets longer, but we'll go through some sporting examples of concentric muscle contractions. So for example, in your arms, boxers, when you're punching, in both phases, when the arm goes out and extends and then you bring it back in, those are concentric muscle contractions. So if I was going to repeat that maybe with a jab, jab, cross that you might have seen in the boxing gym. So it goes jab, jab, cross, jab, jab, cross, jab, jab, cross. Those movements are all concentric. The muscles are changing in length and they're getting shorter, both as you come in. Okay, so as the arm comes in towards the body, that's your bicep working as the agonist, and your tricep at the back of the arm working as the antagonist, the one that relaxes, and then it switches over. So as you extend your arm out, that's your tricep working as the agonist, and your bicep is the antagonist, the one that's relaxing. Okay? Another example might be if you're kicking a football. So as I go to prepare to kick the football and I bring my leg back from here to here, my hamstrings are working. Hamstrings would be the agonist, and the quadriceps at the front of the leg are the ones that are relaxing as I bring my leg back. As I go to then extend my leg to strike the football, my quadriceps become the agonist and the hamstrings become the antagonist. Okay, so it switches around depending on the type of movement. Same thing would happen when you're running. So when you bring your leg back, hamstrings are the agonist, quadriceps are the antagonist, and then as you extend your leg out to run, the quadriceps become the agonist and the hamstrings become the antagonist. Now the key thing that you've got to remember, when it's eccentric and the muscles are increasing in length that only happens during controlled downward movement. So if you can think of a sporting example where there's controlled downward movement, for instance, lowering down on a press up, lowering down on a squat, lowering the weight down during an exercise in weight training, all of those are controlled downward movements, which means that the muscles are working eccentrically. So for example, during a press up, from this position, as I lower myself down to the ground, the muscles are working eccentrically. During a bicep curl, once I've brought them up, as I lower them back down, the muscles are working eccentrically. When I lift them, the muscles are working concentrically. When I push myself up from my press up, the muscles are working concentrically. When I push myself up from a squat up here, my leg muscles are working concentrically, but it's the downward movement that makes it eccentric. Now, the really complicated part of this is then the muscles, which are the agonist and the antagonist for the eccentric part of that contraction, switch over. So normally, for instance, in a press up, in the extension phase, it would be triceps working and biceps are the ones that are relaxing. However, because it's an eccentric contraction, and you can do this and you'll feel it in your arms, as you lower yourself down, it's actually the triceps that are working. So the triceps are working, but they're working eccentrically, and the biceps are the ones that are relaxing. On the way up, it's a concentric contraction. So during that extension, it's just a normal contraction. So in that case, it would again be your triceps working, they're the agonist, and your biceps are the ones that are relaxing. So the triceps are the agonist in the lowering and then the pushing back up. Same thing on a squat. So normally during flexion, when you're lowering, when you're bending the leg, normally that would be your hamstrings at the back, but because it's controlled downward movement, it's actually my quadriceps that are working and my hamstrings are relaxing, and then on concentric contraction on the way up, my quadriceps working again, but they're working concentrically, because in that case on the way up the muscle length is getting shorter. Okay, so those are some key examples. The key thing is, the most complicated part of it is that eccentric muscle contraction happens during controlled downward movement, and the agonist is the opposite of what you'd normally think. Okay, I know it's a tricky subject, but if you go over it a couple of times, it will really put you in a good place, hopefully for the end of year exams and then moving into the GCSE. Okay, all the best, take it easy, bye bye.